Today's number 3 most urgent vulnerability on the Daily Ranked CVE Brief is CVE 2026-45659 in Microsoft SharePoint Server. And the reason it earns a top 3 spot is not just the 8.8 high CVSS score. It is also on CISA's Known Exploited Vulnerabilities catalog, which means defenders should treat this as an active priority issue, not a theoretical backlog item. The core risk is plain: an authorized attacker can execute code over the network. For organizations using SharePoint as a collaboration hub, document portal, workflow engine, or internal business platform, that puts a high-value server in scope. Our daily promise is simple: what to patch first, ranked by real exploitation signal, CISA KEV, first EPSS, and CVSS. Today, SharePoint is near the top of that queue. The official NVD description says, deserialization of untrusted data in Microsoft Office SharePoint allows an authorized attacker to execute code over a network. The weakness category is CVE-502, deserialization of untrusted data. In plain English, deserialization is what happens when software takes structured data and turns it back into live objects or instructions the application can use. That is normal in many systems. The danger begins when the application accepts data it should not trust and processes it in a way that can change program behavior. In this case, the result is serious: code execution. This is not described as simple information disclosure or a minor permissions issue. It is a flaw in how SharePoint handles data. Verdict: this is a high-severity, network-reachable code execution issue that should be prioritized quickly, especially where SharePoint is broadly accessible. The CVSS vector is 8.8 high, AVN, ACL, PRL, UIN, with high impact to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The two metrics that matter most are reachability and complexity. Network attack vector means the attacker does not need local access to the server. Low attack complexity means the scoring does not assume unusual race conditions or highly fragile circumstances. There is one important limiter: privileges required are low, so the attacker must be authorized in some way. But in a SharePoint environment, low-privileged accounts can be numerous: employees, contractors, service identities, or compromised user accounts. The biggest prioritization signal here is CISA KEV status. A vulnerability can have a high CVSS score and still never matter in your environment. KEV changes the conversation because it means the issue is recognized as known exploited. Pair that with an EPSS percentile of 0.8679, and this is not just another high-severity SharePoint bug sitting in a spreadsheet. It has meaningful exploitation signal compared with the broader vulnerability population. The operational concern is that SharePoint often sits at a junction of identity, documents, business processes, and internal trust. If code execution lands on a SharePoint server, defenders must think beyond the application. They need to consider data exposure, tampering, disruption, and the possibility that the server becomes a foothold. Conceptually, the attack path has 3 defensive takeaways. First, the attacker needs some authorized access, not necessarily administrative access, according to the CVSS privileges required metric. That makes stolen credentials, weak account hygiene, and overly broad access relevant to your risk. Second, the flaw is network reachable. If users can reach the SharePoint service, then a malicious authorized user, or an intruder using a valid account, may also be able to reach the vulnerable surface. Third, user interaction is not required in the CVSS vector. That means defenders should not rely on someone clicking a document or approving a prompt as the main barrier. We are not walking through exploitation mechanics, but the defensive model is clear. Account access plus network reachability plus unsafe deserialization can lead to server-side code execution. To check exposure, start with inventory. Identify every Microsoft SharePoint Server instance you operate, including production, staging, disaster recovery, and older systems that may not be in your primary asset list. Then compare those systems against the official Microsoft advisory for CVE 2026-45659. Do not guess version coverage from memory, and do not assume a server is safe because it is internal. For exact affected versions, update availability, and any vendor-specific conditions, use the Microsoft guidance. Next, map reachability. Which SharePoint servers are exposed to the internet, reachable through VPN, accessible by partners, or open to large internal user groups? Because the attacker must be authorized, Also review where low-privileged accounts can authenticate. Broad access increases the pool of accounts that matter. The primary remediation is to apply the official Microsoft update or mitigation guidance for CVE 2026-45659 as soon as possible, following your normal change control process but with KEV-level urgency. Prioritize systems that are externally reachable, heavily used, or connected to sensitive business data. While patching is underway, reduce exposure where you can. Limit network paths to SharePoint. Require strong authentication controls, and make sure only necessary users and services can reach the application. Review low-privileged accounts with SharePoint access, remove stale accounts, and investigate unusual recent authentication activity. If you operate compensating controls such as application layer filtering, EDR, or strict egress controls on servers, make sure they are active and monitored. But do not treat hardening as a substitute for the vendor fix. For detection, focus on deviations from normal SharePoint behavior. Review SharePoint application logs, web access logs, authentication logs, and endpoint telemetry from the SharePoint servers themselves. Look for unusual authenticated request patterns, especially from low-privileged accounts, newly created accounts, accounts used from unfamiliar locations, or access that occurs outside normal business patterns. On the server, watch for unexpected child processes, unusual script execution, new or modified files in application-related locations, and abnormal outbound network connections from a system that normally has predictable communication paths. Also monitor for availability symptoms, service crashes, repeated errors, or sudden performance degradation. None of these signals alone proves exploitation, but together they can help you detect suspicious activity while patching is completed and after the fix is deployed. To recap, CVE 2026-45659 is today's number 3 ranked CVE because it combines a serious SharePoint Server code execution impact, a high 8.8 CVSS score, CISA KEV status, and a meaningful EPSS percentile. The flaw is CVE-502, deserialization of untrusted data, and the official description says an authorized attacker can execute code over a network. Your action plan is straightforward. Confirm your SharePoint server inventory. Check Microsoft's advisory for exact applicability. Patch quickly, reduce unnecessary access, and monitor for abnormal authenticated activity and server-side behavior. This is the Daily Ranked CVE Brief. What to patch first, ranked by real exploitation signal every day. Subscribe for the next ranked breakdown, and see the full ranked report, linked in the description.